everybody come on back in and find our seats. And we want to make one more plug about the hat and mitten drive. This is our final Sunday, right? So you didn't get it in today and you have some that you want to donate, please see Kelly as soon as worship service is over. That would be great, and we will be ready to help out. Kelly, we feel like we're on track with how many we wanted to get? Okay, good. All right, today we're continuing our life management series, and we've been focusing on relationship management for the last several weeks. So this is part 4 of relationship management, and I want to talk about one of the things that is the most important thing in relationships. Because if you don't have it, the relationship will not sustain, at least not in quality, and sometimes not at all. And that's forgiveness. Okay, forgiveness is a difficult one, isn't it? And so we're going to talk about that. Now, normally what I would do in a sermon like this, I would lay out a passage and we would read it, and then we would kind of look at it, and then we would discuss it. But I'm going to save the passage for the end. Okay, we always have Bible when I preach, but I want to take the parts that we already deal with at an emotional level and ask ourselves some of the hard questions about forgiveness, so that when we get to these passages, our hearts are already primed and ready for them. Okay? So I'm going to ask a few questions. Noel, could you hand me that? No, this one. Thank you. You did a good job handing it to me, and then I set it down. So, I entitled today's lesson, Why Forgive? Why Forgive? Unforgiveness is one of the hardest sins to fight. And I was trying to meditate on that and ask myself, why is it that forgiveness is so difficult? You know, as a habit, as a spiritual habit, something that we have in our life all the time, why is it so difficult? And the more I thought about it, I was like, you know, a lot of the things that we do in Christianity, we are picking up a new habit. We're building a skill set. We're adding something to, right? Forgiveness, letting go of something is different than picking something up. We're in the habit of starting something new, actually doing something, but letting something go sometimes can be a whole different skill set, right? And so when we're talking about forgiveness, we're talking about letting go of a hurt or an offense. And so it can be very difficult to do that. It's not something we do, it's something we let go of, not something we pick up. So why is forgiveness so hard? Why is this one of the hardest things to do in life? And this is an important question, because if we don't know this, if we don't practice this, if we don't do this, it really will decrease the quality in every one of our relationships. And it has the tendency long term to make us bitter people, and we don't want to be there. So why is forgiveness hard? Because we might be right. In fact, we're sure we are right, you know? When it comes to the thing that hurt us, I know I was right. I was the one in the right, they were the one in the wrong, correct? Is it the same with you?
Yeah.
I mean, none of us could ever hurt each other's feelings because we're always right. See, I'm glad that's why we have so much church unity here, because we're all always right. And yet, sometimes, even when you're right and the other person is wrong, there is still a need to forgive. You've probably heard it say, you know, don't forgive because they deserve it, because they're wrong. Okay? Do it because you need it. I need to forgive for my sake, not just to release that person from something I feel toward them, but unforgiveness actually hurts me if I hold on to it more than it hurts the person I need to forgive, because they may not even know they offended me. So they're not putting very much mental and emotional energy into it, right? They're just going along their happy way, either not caring or not knowing. But the person who needs to forgive is the person who dwells, spends the mental energy, the emotional energy, the spiritual energy. Why can't this relationship be better? Why can't they just do the right thing? Why do they have to keep hurting my feelings? You know, those kinds of things. So, one reason is we might be right. Another reason is we might be falsely accused. I'm going to have to tread very lightly here. I'm not going to get into any details, but if you watch TV at all this week, if you follow politics, even with a least inkling, what we heard today, and I'm not taking sides up here, I do not preach politics from the pulpit, okay? But what we saw was two people with two completely different stories, both emotionally credible, all right? But we know they can't both be right, okay? Somebody was accusing somebody of doing something 34 years ago, and somebody was accusing that person was accusing the other person of making up a story about them to mess up their character. They both can't be right. Now again, I'm not taking sides and I'm not getting into the political end of it, okay? But every one of us have been falsely accused before, haven't we? Every one. We know how it feels when we know we were right and someone said we were wrong. And to me, one of the most hurtful things is when someone actually maligns my motives. Because I'm like, hey, I work really hard on my motives. You know, I'm trying to be a man of God. I'm trying to keep a pure line between me and God, keep my heart right, not just do the right things, but do the right things for the right reasons. And then somebody comes along and accuses me of having a bad heart. Ooh, it does. It stabs me. It stabs me right here. And I know you're the same way. Because when you do the right thing and someone says you did the wrong thing, it's not like you did nothing and somebody accused you. You actually did the right thing. And then someone says you did the wrong thing. And they're the ones that are the squeaky wheel and they're making you look bad, right? So sometimes we may be falsely accused and it is hard to forgive at that point. So, what's another reason it's hard to forgive? Well, our own pride. When I know I'm right, or when I know I've been falsely accused, I want to, all right? No, this is me. No, you are wrong, you know? And somehow, even though we may have done the right thing for the right reason, pride can still set in after the fact when the offense comes. And then at that point, we're battling with something completely different, right? All right, what about this? Someone we love has been hurt. The accusation is not against us. The offense is not against us. It's someone we love, right? Parents, does your little mama bear come out sometimes when somebody attacks your kid on the playground or bullies your kid or says the wrong thing about your kid, right? You can mess with me all day long. Don't you mess with my kid. Don't you mess with my kid. And I will hold a grudge against you forever. I will make sure you never get a job in this town. I will make sure that the teachers know what you have done. I will talk to the principal about you. We are going to deal with this, and your life is ruined from here on out. So don't steal a candy bar from my kid ever again. Right? Okay? But you know, we have this almost disproportionate emotional response for something that, even for the little things, right? And it just gets our ire up, and it's like, So these are four of the top ones. This is not an exhaustive list, obviously, but these are some of the ones that I think are most common for us when we've got something that needs to be forgiven, we're hurt, and then something changes in our heart. It does something. It messes with our heart in a way that it's now not at peace the way God wants it to be. All right? So what are some signs of a person who's holding a grudge? Can you tell? You know? You usually can, can't you? Right? This kind of person will dwell on the offense over and over and over again. It could keep them up at night. It could be the topic of conversation that always comes up anytime that person's name is mentioned or that group's name is mentioned, right? They remember the details. You know, there's something about the way our brain operates that in times of crisis or trauma or something really big out of the picture happens, that we kind of lock in those details, you know. It may have been 20 years ago, but I remember the color shirt they were wearing. I remember the room we were in. I remember how they said it. I remember their tone. If there was a smell in that room, I remember that smell. And almost anything can trigger us, right? We get triggered easily because we've dwelt on this so much and it's locked in our memory. We remember details. Here's what happens. And here's why it's important for us to forgive even when the other person's not asking for it. An unforgiving heart is destined to become bitter over time. Now, bitterness can set in quickly or it can take years to happen. But forgiveness is more of a release than it is anything from an emotional standpoint. It is something that we need to do. Otherwise, we become bitter. I heard someone tell me that a counselor told them one time, what you don't forgive, you become. And I thought about that, and I'm like, wow. You know, the very thing that we don't like in someone else, if we don't forgive it, we have a tendency to repeat it. We have a tendency to live it out. We have a tendency to go from victim to perpetrator. And we justify it in our mind because I was treated this way. Now I have the right to treat somebody else this way because I shouldn't be the only one hurting, right? We may not think about it in those terms, but at another level, at a deeper level, that's really what's going on. That little 2-year-old inside of all of us comes out and says, I'm going to have my way. You know, I don't deserve this, so I'm going to fight back. And we don't send it back where it came from. We send it maybe to somebody else who's innocent. And now we've done the same thing to someone else that someone did to us, and they don't deserve it, right? Okay. Why are we hesitant to forgive? Why is this such a hard thing for us? Why is it so difficult to forgive? And I think the best answer I can come up with is this. We need time to process. We need time to process deep hurts. When we've been hurt very deeply by someone, maybe we've gone through a betrayal, maybe a spouse has committed adultery, maybe that person who promised us that when we got this job we were going to advance up the ranks pretty quickly, and then it didn't happen, and we see other people get the promotion that we thought was promised to us. Maybe it's that person who hurt the person that you love, and we need time to process that. From an emotional perspective, forgiveness is like peeling layers off an onion, right? From an emotional perspective. You know, God is, He's brilliant in the way He tells us to deal with forgiveness. And we're going to see this in a couple of parables that Jesus told. God does not deal with our feelings when it comes to deep hurts as much as He deals with our decisions. Because forgiveness, the way it's spoken of in the Bible, is a decision, not an emotion. God's not going to ask us to do something that is impossible for us to do. I've had this deep hurt. It's ruined my reputation. It's hurt me. It's hurt my family members, or it's done something like that. And so emotionally, is God asking me to have nice, fluffy feelings toward that person immediately? It's impossible, isn't it? Emotionally, we have to layer that off, one layer at a time. But in our spirit, spiritually speaking, and mentally, if our spirit can talk to our mind, we need to make a decision. God said forgive, and I'm going to forgive. All right? So we need time to process. And we need to come out of the emotional definition of forgiveness and into the spiritual definition. To decide. Why forgive? Why are we hesitant to forgive? Justice has not been accomplished yet. When they make it right, I'll forgive. When they apologize, I'll forgive. When all the score is settled and I've been vindicated and everybody that they hurt me in front of now knows that I was right, then I'll forgive. How many times does that happen? How many times? Has that ever happened? I mean, completely outside of a very close friend who's highly skilled in the art of apology? You know? It almost never happens, does it? All right. Justice does not always get accomplished. Most of the time, it doesn't. And if it does, sometimes it's years or decades down the road. Well, let me tell you what triumphs over justice. Mercy trumps justice. God said, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy trumps justice. You know what trumps mercy? Grace trumps mercy. So on the level of goodness here, we got justice. This is when you get what you deserve. Then we got mercy, where somebody doesn't get what they deserve. And grace is when you get something that you don't deserve. See, mercy is not getting something bad you deserve, but grace is getting something good you don't deserve. And this is the forgiveness zone right here. Forgiveness doesn't happen when we focus on justice. Forgiveness usually doesn't happen when we focus on mercy. But forgiveness will always happen when we're living in the grace zone. And that's where I want to challenge us to be. Deep forgiveness is only found in that grace zone, where I say, I know you don't deserve it. I don't even know if you've repented. I don't even know if you care. I don't even know if you're going to promise me that it's never going to happen again. But because God said to do this, and for my own heart's sake, I'm going to let it go. I'm going to release it. And I'm going to make the decision in my mind first, and then my heart's going to follow. And how far my heart may follow may depend on how deep the hurt was and how long of a distance it's been between when it happened and now. But again, we're talking the difference between emotional forgiveness and spiritual forgiveness, biblical forgiveness. So why are we hesitant to forgive? We need that time to process. Justice has not been accomplished yet, and maybe they've not asked for my forgiveness. Please don't wait. Don't wait for someone to ask for your forgiveness before you give it. Because even if they do, the time distance between the offense and the apology, damage is done in our own heart. Hurt is done in our own heart. It makes a difference that we begin to forgive as immediately as possible. And let me ask you this. There's a lot of people that have offended us in a lot of ways. All right? Who is the hardest person for you to forgive? Is it your spouse? You know, it is harder. Yeah. We're going to get there. Yeah. It's harder when you live with somebody, right? When I'm doing pre-marital counseling with young people, and I say, loving the person is not the hard part. You fell in love at an emotional level, and your heart's following, you're making decisions about that. The hard part is living with somebody. That's the hard part. Why is it everything seems so easy when you're dating, and then when you're married and you're living together, all of a sudden little habits that they have that you didn't know they had are out there, and it's just like, well, that's aggravating. That's annoying. You don't squeeze your toothpaste from the bottom. You just kind of squeeze it in the middle, and then some of it's all down there, and then you got this part in the middle. I mean, who would do such a thing like that? This is terrible. I can't believe you. I mean, it's so obvious the way you ought to be doing it, and you're so annoying that you're not doing it the right way, i.e. my way, right? Okay? So people we live with, specifically people we're in a covenant relationship with, can drive us crazy. And forgiveness has to be so ready at the front end of every disagreement, of every tiff, of every annoying habit. Forgiveness needs to be waiting, crouching, ready to go. You know what? I love you, and that bothers me, but we're going to talk through it if we can work through it if we can. And if we can't, I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to forgive you. Okay, there are spouses right now who are getting bruised in the ribs. We need to stop all the elbowing going on here, okay? I don't want to have to pay for anybody's doctor's bill because of my sermon today, all right? How about this? How about parents? Are parents hard to forgive sometimes? We get to be adults, and we look back on our childhood, and we're like, boy, I had it bad. I had it bad. I can't believe my parents neglected me the way they did, or hurt me the way they did, or abused me, or didn't give me the privileges I needed, or gave me the early curfew, or and there are. I don't want to make light of this. There is serious abuse going on. Any town in America, there are kids that are silently hurting and crying on the inside, and nobody knows what's going on with them at home. And they live with it day after day after day, and then they get out of the house, and they grow up, and they look back, and they have a choice to make. I turn my back on you for the way you treated me, and I'm never going to talk to you again, and I'm never going to have anything to do with you again. Or I'm going to try to get some help. I'm trying to work through this. I'm going to try to understand where you were coming from and what happened to you when you were younger, and I'm going to try to, with healthy boundaries, to emphasize that, with healthy boundaries, try to pour some into this relationship to make it better. Can we always make it better? No, we can't. It takes people on both sides to do that. But sometimes parents can be hard to forgive if there's deep hurts there. How about siblings? We all dealt with sibling rivalry. We had maybe the older sibling that picked on us, or the younger sibling that annoyed us, or someone who wanted to get involved, too close with our friendships, and this kind of thing. Every one of us have gone through that, right? And again, we're in the same house, we're living in the same place, we're seeing all the annoying habits, different personalities and how they conflict, And yet, forgiveness still needs to happen. How about this one, a friend who betrayed you? Is that the hardest one for you? The psalmist talked about that. And it was a prophecy really about Jesus and Judas. And I could have understood if it was my enemy that betrayed me, but it was you. It was my friend. It was the one I broke bread with. And you're the one that turned your back on me. You're the one that turned me in. You're the one that just messed me over. I can't believe that. And to go from a friend that we enjoy and we think loves us and we think is going to look out for our best interest, and then they do something to betray us or hurt us, it is hard to overcome. But this next one, God, I used to wonder, how could anybody think they need to forgive God? He's perfect, And yet I've met so many people in my lifetime who, one guy in particular comes to mind at a previous church, someone that none of you know, but he was in a great marriage, truly loved his wife, and she died early, way earlier than anyone would have expected her. And he was so heartbroken over this. He was so just devastated by it that he began to blame God for her death. And he would cry out to God, and he would say, God, why didn't you take me? She was the good one. She was the one that understood grace. She's the one that loved you more. I didn't even learn to love you until I met her. And you took her first? Why would you take her at such a young age? And he came to me when he first started coming to our former church, and I thought, wow, this must be fresh. This is really raw with him. This must have happened in the last 6 to 12 months or something. When I asked him about it, it was like 15 years before. And bitterness had set in so much, he could not get over his hurt towards God. And he never could rationalize through it. He never could think through it. He never could come up with a good answer. And all it did was just made him more and more mad at God. And I wonder why he even came to worship. Sometimes I think he just came to worship to complain to Christians about God, And I don't think that was his motive, but I think subconsciously there was something going on there. He was just crying out for an answer. Listen, there's no easy answer when we try to ask ourselves, why did someone die? Or why did someone die earlier? Why did someone die when they're a child? Or why did someone get cancer? There are no easy answers for that. Those are things we're just not going to understand. But does that mean we have to blame God for it? It really doesn't. Well, here's one I think that's hardest for most of us, and that is to forgive ourselves. We as Christians, we hold ourselves to a pretty high standard, don't we? We expect more out of ourselves than we do other people. We expect that we're going to be the ones that are always going to be the bigger person. We're always going to do the better thing. We're always going to be a little more spiritual maybe than other people. And then we look at our own sinfulness, and we look at mistakes that we've made, and we look at ourselves and we're like, you know better than that. And we begin to talk to ourselves. We start this negative self-talk. And we can be our own worst enemy. I promise you there's not a one of you in this room that can beat me up worse than I can beat myself up. Okay? And you're probably the same way, right? Because we hold ourselves to a high standard. We love God. We get grace. We want to live in such a way that honors God. And when we see a dark part of our heart or a decision that seems out of character for a Christian, and we do it, we regret it, we feel bad about it, and then we come back and we're like, who am I? I guess I'm not who I thought I was. And instead of depending on God's grace and moving into a better place, we stop and we just beat ourselves up. I saw a meme a couple of weeks ago that says, if you want to get to know me, don't walk a mile in my shoes. Spend 30 seconds in my head. That'll freak you out. Okay? So that's kind of where we all are at times, right? We can be our own worst enemy. We can beat ourselves up too much. And you know what? I say this. Who are you to not forgive what God has forgiven? God's forgiven you. If you're a Christian, you're walking in grace. You're walking in Christ where there is no condemnation. And yes, you might forgive everybody else on planet Earth and then hold a grudge against yourself and not forgive yourself for things you've done when God has forgiven it. Who are we to not forgive what God has forgiven? Am I talking to anybody here? Okay, you don't have to raise your hand. It's all right. We could all do it, right? So the hardest person to give. You know, why do we forgive? We need a reason. We need a really good reason to forgive. Now, the reason should be, God said. That should be enough for us, right? God said to do it. And, it's like the parents when they, children say, well, why do I have to do that chore? And the parent's favorite answer is, because I said so, right? But that's the right answer, right? And just like that doesn't work with children, it doesn't work with us as children of God either, right? It should. It should be enough that we respect God's authority, and we know that He knows what's best, and He's looking out for our best interests. And so now we should just say, well, God said to do it, so I'm going to do it. But unfortunately, in our weakness, in our immaturity, sometimes we need a better reason. We need to go a little deeper with God and see what it is. Because we choose who we forgive, we choose when we forgive, and we choose how we forgive based on standards. And some of our standards are false standards. Sometimes we say, I will forgive because they didn't mean to do it. And what does that imply? If they didn't mean to do it, I wouldn't forgive them, right? Okay? That's a false standard for forgiveness. All right? They didn't understand. And someone says, well, didn't Jesus say on the cross, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing? Yes, He did, and that sounds like that's what this is talking about. But I want to make a little distinction here. Some of them did know what they were doing, and Jesus still forgave them. But like number one here, number two, if I say I'll forgive them because they didn't understand, then that assumes that I won't forgive them if they did understand what they were doing. If it was intentional, I won't forgive it. If it was unintentional, I'll forgive it. That's a bad standard. It's a bad standard for forgiveness. How about this one? No harm was done this time. Right? No harm, no foul. Okay? There was no, or as we used to say in street basketball, no blood, no foul. Right? Okay? Assuming that if there were blood, there would be a foul. And if there were a hurt, then it would not be forgiven. Any harm done? Forgive. Whether it was or not. So what should be our reason? What is the correct standard for forgiveness? God says because we've been forgiven. Now from our perspective, here's what we feel like, okay? I feel like, I think about the worst thing that was ever done to me. And I don't know what that was for you. Was it a betrayal? Was it abuse? Was it neglect? Was it something by a someone close? Was it an authority figure? I don't know, okay? I don't know. But we focus on what was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And we put that in the category of worst things, right? There is nothing that has been done to you that has not been done to God by many more people, many more times throughout history. And He says, I offer you forgiveness to everyone. It's not a person on planet Earth God doesn't love. Not a person on planet Earth that God would not forgive. Not a person that when Jesus died on the cross that was exempted from that sacrifice that He made. It is available to everyone, no matter how bad their sin is, no matter how long they've been in sin, no matter how I categorize that sin, it doesn't matter. Whatever you put in the category of the worst thing that ever happened to you, for me, the worst thing that ever happened to me, it has happened to God worse. It happened to Him by more people over a longer period of time. And He says, forgive as I have forgiven you. We have been forgiven. That's grace. God lives in the grace zone all the time. So where is our focus? Is our focus on, well, that's the worst thing that ever happened to me, so from my perspective, that's the worst thing. And we stop there? If you stop there, you will continue to dwell on that point. But if we put it in perspective and say, God, I just think about what I've done to you, and you've offered me forgiveness. You know every motive of my heart. You know every thought in my mind. You know every action I've ever done. Whether I've hidden it from every person in the world or not, you know it, and you still offer me forgiveness. Now, if God can forgive you of everything you've ever done, everything you've ever thought, every motive of your heart you've ever had, who are we not to forgive? And that's where the Scripture comes in. I said all of that to get us to the Scripture that we need to look at. And this is it, Matthew chapter 18. Now that we're primed, now that we're thinking about those hurts, now that faces are coming to our mind and situations are coming to our mind, the same thing was going on with Peter. Peter had heard Jesus talk about forgiveness. He had seen Jesus forgive. But, Peter wanted an answer. He wanted a limit. He wanted a number. All right? So here's his question. And Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Now, I think Peter kind of pre-thought through this, and he wanted to come off looking good. Because, 3 is one of those holy numbers, And he probably thought Jesus was going to say 3, but he was going to come off looking really good when he said 7. He's going to come across looking a little more spiritual. Lord, I know there's people who've hurt my feelings, and how many times should I forgive them? 7? And then he thought Jesus was going to say 3, and he's going to be like, I'll just go ahead and give it 7 anyway. I know you said 3, Jesus, but I'll just give it 7 anyway. Now, what are you doing when you're looking for a number? When you're looking for a number on forgiveness, you're looking for a cap, right? And if Jesus had given him a specific number and said, yep, Peter, 7 times, that's it. Now, what's Peter going to be doing at that point? Thomas comes along, hurts his feelings. On the outside, Peter says, I forgive you, brother. That's all right, Thomas. I love you. I forgive you. But on the inside, Peter's saying, that's 1. Right? Second time, Thomas hurts his feelings. Thomas, I love you, brother. That's all right. We're still buddies. I forgive you. But on the inside, that's 2. And then we're going to get to 7. Peter's going to be all calm and collected because now he knows he's ready to spring the trap, right? And on the 8th time, Peter's going to feel like he's got the right just to blow up on Thomas. This has happened not once, not twice, not 3 times. This is a pattern. This is something that's terrible. I can't believe you don't love me any more than that. And he's going to feel justified in giving full vent to his anger. So Jesus gave him this kind of parable mathematic formula, right? Okay? Jesus answered, I tell you not 7 times, but 77 times. Some translations say 7 times 70. Now, what he's not saying here is 490. And then the 491st time you can blow up, like if he had said 7, the 8th time you can blow up. That's not what Jesus is saying here, all right? What's he saying? He's going to give him a parable. He's going to speak to him in an emotional word picture like we talked about a few weeks ago. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And that's what emotions are. That's what forgiveness is. It's trying to settle accounts, right? Trying to make everything balanced and right. We're trying to get things back the way they should be. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Right, now, back in those days, that's how you became a slave, or what they would call an indentured servant. You borrowed more money than you could pay back, and then when you couldn't pay it back, you'd already pre-signed an agreement that you can't pay this back, you got to work it off. All right? That is, in most cultures, how slavery got started. It started off as indentured servitude. And that was something that was common in first century. Okay? And the bad news was, if you married the wrong person, or you had the wrong parent, and they could pay off their debt, you got to suffer for it too. Doesn't sound very fair, does it? Well, forgiveness is not a fair thing. Sin's not a fair thing. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay it back. Now, he should have had a deja vu moment right there, right? These are the very words he just spoke to his master, who he owed way more to. And then this other guy who owes him, 20 bucks or whatever, comes by and says, I'll pay you back, just be patient. There was no connection there. There was no mental or emotional connection there. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Same master that this guy had. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is a parable from Jesus, okay? This is talking about the emotional score we always want to settle, that in most cases is not going to be settled. the books will never be balanced. Things will not ever be equal. We're never going to get an equal sign in there. It's always going to be a less than sign, okay? And so, Jesus' example is this. When someone's hurt you more than they can pay back, and emotionally we feel like they can never pay us back for the damage that they've done, depending on how deep the hurt is. Jesus says, just cancel the debt. Just let it go. Your heart will be better. The relationship could be restored, possibly. But he ends with this. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Not like the example before where we put on a good face and then say, but that's one. That's two. Counting. There's three. Love keeps no record of wrongs. Okay? That's what the Bible says. Jesus, who offers forgiveness to every person, actually puts a condition on this one. Now, we talk a lot about God's unconditional love, and he has much unconditional love, and he has many unconditional blessings. But on this one, he put a condition on it. He says, this is what's going to happen to you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. Now, the stakes just went way up on this, didn't they? All of a sudden, we got to get from a place where I am justified in my anger, justified in my bitterness, justified in my unforgiveness, justified in holding a grudge, to, if I don't forgive, I'm like that guy. I'm like that guy that was forgiven much and couldn't forgive little. Folks, this is serious. Relationships depend on our ability to forgive. And when we don't, the relationship is done. Oh, it may look good on the outside, but it's done. One more story that Jesus told in Luke chapter 7. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. Neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Wow. I got to tell you a story. I don't know if I've told you this one before or not, but this is one that bears repeating if I haven't. It's my first year in youth ministry. I was actually a campus minister, but during the summers I worked more with the teenagers. My first full-time job in ministry after my internship. And there was a single mom in our church who had a very rough life. You could look at her, you wouldn't believe she was 35 because it was the mileage, not the years, okay? And she had a rough life. She was overcoming drug addictions. She had one daughter, lived at home. The daughter had just become a teenager and was getting into that rebellious stage that often happens with teenagers. And the fights were happening daily, and the volume was going up, and the tensions were going up. And I didn't know about most of this, but I just showed up at youth meeting one day, and after it was over, Mom came to pick her up, and all the other kids are gone. And she's like, I've done everything I can do with her. You're the youth minister. You deal with it now. And she left. I'm like, she gonna want me to adopt her kid? I'm like, not even married yet. I don't know what to do with this. And I just, real quick prayer for wisdom. Kind of de-escalated the situation a little bit. When Mom left, I talked to the daughter and got her down to a calm place. And I knew she didn't. Mom was kind of still a new Christian, and I knew she had never read anything in her Bible. And I was reminded of this Luke chapter 7 passage. And I said, you know what, let me tell you a story. I didn't tell her it was out of the Bible. I didn't tell her it was a parable. I didn't tell her it was something Jesus said. I just said, there was this person who, these two people who owed somebody a lot of money. One of them owed $50, and the other one owed him $5,000. Neither one could pay the guy back. And so he just told them both, forget about it, don't worry about it. I'll just let it go. I said, which one of those two people do you think loved that guy more? And you know what she said? The same thing Simon said right here. Well, I suppose the one that owed him more money. I said, listen, I know things are bad between you and your mom. I know life's been unfair to you. In my mind, I want to think that your mom's doing the best that she can, but she had it rough growing up from what I hear. She never built the skill sets to be the loving mom you're wanting her to be. Don't doubt that she loves you. but you're going to have to let go of a big debt. And I'm going to ask you to be a big person here. And I'm going to ask you to do the hardest thing that you're going to have to do, maybe in your life, and that is to forgive your mom. Because every time she falls back into those drugs, and every time she brings a new guy home because she's insecure, and the attention goes off of you, or maybe comes onto you in a negative way instead of a positive way, we're talking about the big debt here. Talking about the really big debt. And I want to ask you if you would just call out to God and ask Him to give you a heart that learns to forgive. And you know what? She did. And I walked out of that day going, God, what did you just do through me? You just changed a relationship right here. You gave a teenage girl who's in the middle of rebellion a soft heart towards the person that's supposed to love her the most that seems like is the harshest towards her. And can't seem to make a decision in this kid's best interest. And you're going to turn this relationship around. I'm telling you, that's the power of forgiveness. It'll change your life. It'll revolutionize who you are. It'll turn you into someone that God says, now there's someone who gets it. There's someone who understands what I did for them. And they're going to turn around and they're going to pay it forward. And this world's going to be a better place because of it. Folks, I don't know who hurt you. I don't know what they did. I don't know what betrayals you face. I don't know whatever. And I know I could be talking to some people with some pretty deep hurts here. I understand that. But the message of Jesus is the same for all of us. Forgive. Forgive because you have been forgiven. You have been forgiven. All right. I'm going to close out with prayer now. And at the end of this prayer, we're just going to sing our final song. And we're going to need a reminder on that song. How good God's love is. How big His grace is. And that's what this song is about. So let's close our eyes and pray right now. And we'll have the worship team come up while we're ready to sing. God, we love you. And we admit that forgiveness is hard. We know it's one of the most difficult things we can do. And so, God, I pray today that you open our hearts wide. And help us not to focus on how bad the hurt is, but to focus on how big your grace is. And how much you've forgiven us. And how much we needed that when we didn't deserve it. And what a difference it's made between us and you. So God, I'm just praying right now that you give us the capacity that we need in our heart to let go of what we need to let go of, to love who we need to love, forgive who we need to forgive, to still hold good boundaries and to not put ourselves unnecessarily in harm's way, emotionally speaking, but to trust you with everything that we have. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.